So welcome to today's Religion Media Centre briefing, where we're looking at the impact of last week's tumultuous events in Liverpool, when the Bishop of Liverpool, John Perumbalah, dramatically announced his retirement 2 days after a Channel 4 report gave details of allegations of sexual abuse and sexual harassment against two women, one of whom was the Bishop of Warrington, Bev Mason. The Bishop of Liverpool has denied he did anything wrong. We're looking today at the impact of this on the City of Liverpool, the Church of England as a whole, and its standing in the country, as it is, after all, the established church. So our speakers today are the Archdeacon of Liverpool, Miranda Threlfall-Holmes, the Reverend Stuart Haynes, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Liverpool, the Bishop of Blackburn, Philip North, Father Alex Frost, a podcaster and Vicar of St Matthew the Apostle, Burnley, and also a member of the General Synod, the Reverend Canon Rachel Firth, Vicar of Huddersfield Parish Church, also a Synod member, and Theo Hobson, a journalist and author of a book Against Establishment, an Anglican Polemic. So thank you all to our guests for joining. To pose the questions, we have several of the journalists who write for us here. Mick Ord, the former managing editor at Radio Merseyside, Tim Wyatt, a journalist and commentator on the Church of England, and the religious affairs journalist Catherine Pepinster. So that's a huge cast list for today. We're going to take the discussion in stages through the city, the church and the nation. And we're going to first of all start with the impact on the City of Liverpool. So over to you, Mick Ord.
Thanks, Ruth. First of all, Archdeacon, what was it like for you on Sunday, presumably having to answer questions from people about the whole episode, which was all over the media last week?
Yeah, Sunday was pretty tough, although I was surprised really at how calm our parishes were. They were pleased that many of us in the diocesan leadership had been very open and transparent with the diocese about where we were at the various different stages through it. Generally, in the places that I work were quite calm and trusting that things were going to be fully investigated and the right things were going to happen.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I've heard some reports that maybe don't fall along those lines, but we can refer to them a little bit later. Reverend Stuart, is the Diocese of Liverpool in a state of turmoil, as some sections of the media are saying?
I think it's easy to say we're in a state of turmoil. We're in unprecedented times, and I think we've got to remember that there are winners and no losers. And what the senior leadership team have been quite assiduous about it for all of this is trying to do the right thing. And the right thing has been talking and listening to staff, to clergy, to parishes, and reflecting their concerns back in the statements that are made. Obviously, we're now moving into a different stage here, which is that stage of trying to work out what is done for the stability of the diocese. But I think also I would reflect back that in a number of places, parishes are doing what they did last week before this news break. They're carrying on with that mission. They're doing that kind of. Yes, it's difficult, and it's difficult for a lot of us. But I think turmoil is a bit too strong a statement for our diocese at this moment.
What would you say is the overriding message that you've got from clergy within the diocese since the incidents last week?
I think the overall message that I've picked up, and Miranda may have picked up a different one, but is the desire for justice, in the sense that these things wouldn't have come in this direction had the structures and the processes been right in the first place. It's sort of, as Miranda said in some of her interviews, if you're a head teacher of a school, or if you're in a sort of different work environment, you're stepped aside, it's investigated, and it's resolved in that kind of way. These mechanisms didn't seem to happen in this instance, and then the whole world gets is a sort of media storm led by an expose kind of report, and that makes it very difficult to operate and functioning for everybody. And so the clergy also very clear that sort of like they want the treatment of themselves in a similar situation to be the same as a treatment for episcopal leadership. And that's a real challenge for the church in these kind of matters.
Now, Miranda, are you satisfied that the diocese did everything it could to talk to Bishop John Perumbalah before the events of last week? Because his resignation did come as a huge shock to so many people in the diocese and beyond.
Yes, I am. I mean, we haven't been involved as, the inverted commas, the diocese, for a great deal of this because, quite properly, when allegations are made against a bishop, those are not investigated within the diocesan structures because it would be almost impossible for that to happen in a fair way without conflicts of interest. So whenever any allegations are made against bishops, those are investigated outside the diocese. So it's not something that we've been part of long term. But in the last time is beginning to lose me, in the last few days, week or so, I'm confident that we had the conversations we needed to have.
How is Bishop Bev Mason as we speak? Has anyone from the church been in touch with her? Because it must have been a traumatizing time for her recently, particularly given the media coverage which you've referred to.
Yeah, people have been in touch with Bishop Bev and are offering.
Yes, one of the things in all of this is bishops. One of the things we've been very clear on in our interpretations for bishops to have pastoral care.
Yes, I mean, in a recent statement, she said that her future plans will be made public this week. Are you able to shed any more light on that?
We are awaiting to hear from Bev on that. We haven't got any additional information at this time.
And has anyone been in touch with Bishop John since his resignation? Stuart briefly alluded to it, but what's the church's duty of care to him?
He has pastoral care from people within the diocese that are trusted colleagues of his, and also from another bishop from outside the diocese. And we've been assured by the Archbishop of York that other arrangements are being put in place as well to make sure that he's got the care he needs.
He clearly feels that he's been the subject of trial by media and not been supported by the church, at least until the past couple of days, maybe, in what he said of false accusations. In the Facebook post, which has been reproduced on the Anglican Inc. website, and I quote from it, he said, "Both the lead bishop and the leadership of the diocese initiated a new chapter in the trial by media."
Yeah, I think we just need to be a little bit careful about that particular post. I know the post that you're referring to. There are journalists here, and I know, I have a lot of respect and trust for journalists. I know you will handle that post ethically and with care. Obviously, that was written at a very emotional time, and he has since taken it down from his personal Facebook page, which is where it was. It was just set to friends, and replaced it with a message saying that he's taking some time away from social media to reflect. And I personally don't think it would be part of a sort of ethical duty of care for that post to be given too much weight. I think it was irresponsible for that to have been posted elsewhere on the internet. I accept that's probably inevitable. But I think we need to be a little bit careful about the ethical and legal issues of things that are said in that post, which was made at a time of great stress.
I know I've spoken to other people on this call about that, and sort of been very good in understanding those issues, because I think we do need to treat this very, very much with the fact that there's a story, but there's also two human beings and other human beings involved in this, and it's very painful and difficult for both of them, as in also the first victim who came forward.
We have no way of knowing whether what the truth is behind these allegations. It would be totally improper for us to be making a judgment. We haven't got the information, and it's not our place to do so. So we've been trying to be really, really clear and careful about saying, the appropriate thing would be for them to be investigated fully and properly. That's something that we know the Church of England systems are not particularly well set up to do, and that's something that those of us who are on Synod are trying to change. Those people who are on Synod and those who followed Synod for some time will know that changing Church of England processes is a frustratingly slow process. But we know that these things need handling better. But I think all we can say is that we think these things should be investigated fully, and the appropriate thing would be for someone to step back while that's happening. It was John's choice to say, actually, for his own mental health, and he said, for the good of the diocese, to prevent a long protracted period of uncertainty, he would step down immediately.
His point, which he also made in his public statement, not in the Facebook post, about the media pressure. I mean, do you agree that the church caved into media pressure and put him in an impossible position, so he had to resign?
I think he was put in an impossible position. I mean, we used the word untenable, didn't we? And I think that was factually true. Whether that's the church doing that, whether it's the whole situation, whether it's the media, I think everything just came together to make it a really difficult and impossible situation. As Stuart said, there couldn't be any winners or any losers at that point.
Now, I've been in contact with some clergy persons in the diocese since the weekend, and they say they feel disillusioned by the leadership of the church across the board. We invited one person to join us in this discussion, and the reply was, "I don't trust the hierarchy." That's from an experienced clergy person in the diocese. Your reaction to that, Archdeacon?
I mean, I'm not surprised. We've known for a long time that there's a real crisis of trust in the Church of England. That's part of a whole wider crisis of trust within our nation, isn't it? The same is true in repeated surveys of the press, of the media, of politicians, of charities. And there is a crisis of trust and a real sense of needing to relook at how hierarchies are structured and how accountability and transparency works in the modern world. And this, of course, is just another sad example of that. So I can hardly blame it for not feeling. I don't feel that hierarchies should be or are to be trusted. Individuals are to be trusted, God's to be trusted. But I can't blame anyone for thinking that, and I'm not surprised anyone's saying it.
Just to put some of the other side on, we have had a number of messages from our clergy to say that they appreciated the work that was done and the tone in which things were put out. So there will always be two sides to these particular arguments. And while I'm sure, as Miranda says, we will both agree that there are people who are concerned about the approach of the leadership, concerned about these kind of things, but that happens in all crises of this manner. But we have also had lots of messages of support and understanding, both corporately and also as individuals, for the difficulties that this kind of situation was just presented us.
I mean, one particular point that I found interesting when I spoke to somebody yesterday, as regards the Bishop of Warrington, she was on leave of absence or study leave, whatever you want to call it, for 18 months. And again, there was no information forthcoming to the clergy people of the diocese or the congregations. And that built up a feeling among many clergy, so I'm told, that a veil was being drawn that only a small number of people in the hierarchy were aware of. Why was this?
I don't think we know. I mean, as I say, I don't feel confident speaking for Bishop Bev. That's very much been her story. I haven't known what exactly the situation was, and I've chosen to respect her privacy in that. And I completely appreciate and understand that people have been feeling very frustrated by that. But where someone is needing to be given space or is choosing to step back for some reason, I think it's important that we give them agency and respect them.
Stuart, would you like to comment on that? You're the director of communications. I mean, it doesn't really smack of transparency and accountability, does it really?
You could say that, but one of the other things is around protecting the individual. So a number of the media, I mean, Channel 4 News, when they were breaking, I think the third day of the story, said, well, they've known that the second bishop was the Bishop of Warrington, but it's not our right to tell her story and to put her situation into the public domain. And yeah, people will always feel sort of frustrated that they haven't been told what they haven't been told, but it's not for us to kind of break the confidences of individuals in a situation that they're in, and we've got to respect their wishes on all of those kind of things.
One final question then. One of the clergy people who I spoke to, said that safeguarding and allegations of misconduct should be managed by an external organisation or organisations, perhaps similar to what Professor Alexis Jay suggested in her report last year. The Synod has a few options on the table with regard to changes to the safeguarding process. Given the number of crises in the Church over the recent past, do you think an independent organisation should be set up or brought in to tackle thorny issues such as those that we've been discussing?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been, over the last year, I've been part of the small group that Synod set up to look into the recommendations of the J.L. Wilkinson report and to bring proposals to this Synod to make decisions on what the future of church safeguarding is going to be. And what we're doing, so it's General Synod is next week, and there's a big report that's gone to Synod. It's available on the website if people want to read the Synod papers. It's out there. And that's proposing that Synod choose between two models. Both of the models set up a new organisation which would be completely independent. We'd be asking government to potentially set that up on some sort of ombudsman model. That's not in our gift, but that's something we would like to see happen. To have an independent organisation which scrutinises, acts as a final complaint body, and so on. So both models have that. And in the first model that Synod's going to be asked to choose between, in the first model, that organisation would also run the national safeguarding team, so the one that looks after cases that go beyond a particular diocese boundary, like this one. In the second model, that organisation would also take over the employment of all the people who are currently embedded in dioceses. So they would remain, the diocesan safeguarding officers and so on would remain living and working in individual dioceses in the really good constructive teams that they're in now, but would be employed by this central model. That's very complicated because you've got to transfer the employment of a huge number of people. But it does mean that there would be a kind of a standardization of processes, procedures, policies, service level, to want a better word, in terms of timings to response and so on.
And complete separation. Safeguarding officers tell us that they don't feel pressure and conflicts of interest, but nevertheless, there is inevitably, of course, a perception that may well exist. And a lot of survivors and victims have told us that they feel uncomfortable going to people employed by a diocese to complain about a diocese. So personally, I will be supporting that second model. If that's not where Synod goes, then I will support the first model, because I think they're both going to be a huge improvement, and a lot of work is happening. Miranda Throgful-Jones, Archdeacon of Liverpool, and Reverend Stuart Haynes, Director of Communications for Liverpool. Many thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Mick. And there are some questions in the chat box, and we will try to come to those at the end when we've heard from all the speakers. But we're going to look next now at the impacts of what happened in Liverpool on the Church of England as a whole. And joining me to ask the questions on this section is Tim Wyatt, one of the journalists who writes for us and many other publications too. Joining us as the guests to answer the questions, the Bishop of Blackburn, Philip North, Father Alex Frost, and the Reverend Canon Rachel Firth. So thank you. Perhaps I could kick things off with Father Alex Frost and Canon Rachel Firth. Huddersfield and Burnley, outside the Diocese of Liverpool, was there still a shocking response to what had happened in Liverpool? Was there still the sense that we've just been hearing from Liverpool of lack of trust, lack of confidence, feeling not brought into the discussion, and feeling generally let down? Perhaps I could ask you first, Alex, and then go to you, Rachel.
I think locally, people are very keen to just get on with the job in hand. I think we're kind of running two parallel universes here. We're running the hierarchy of the Church of England that is in disarray, and we've got the local churches that are going about their day-to-day ministry, doing their best against the backdrop of a church that seems to be in free fall. I think there's been a lot of empathy towards the individuals concerned, both the Bishop of Warrington and also Bishop John. But I think it just shows how far we've fallen. And I was interested what Miranda had said about about trust, and she said that the hierarchy of the church perhaps shouldn't be trusted. I couldn't disagree more, to be honest. I think here lies one of the huge problems, is there is a huge breakdown in trust and honesty and integrity. And unless we regain that, we will lose more and more people. You know, I had a call from a friend who'd read an article in the paper, and he used typically industrial language that we get around here, and said, you know, I won't repeat exactly what he said, but he alluded to say, you know, it's you guys on the ground. You know, what chance have you got when you've got this as the backdrop? And, you know, I think really we need to set about this quickly to regain some credibility, because we're fast losing it. And that really irritates me and people around me, because there's a job to be done that doesn't get reported about. And that's the one that I want to talk about, which is the gospel of Jesus.
I'm a bit both and with this. I kind of, having listened to some of the things that other people had to say, locally, I think people are not surprised. Surprised is not the right word. How many more revelations do there have to be? How much more is going to keep being said? There is a tiredness. There is deep sympathy for people who are in positions of hurt and trauma, of course, but there is a tiredness in our communities. But there's also a lack of surprise, because the people in our churches are people who are also in the world and are aware that safeguarding and the mistakes that are made in every quarter of life. They see horrible scandals and difficult situations in their places of work, in the other institutions that they are part of. And I think that people in church recognise that we are part, as a church, of that bigger cultural picture. And we keep talking about how far we've come with safeguarding, because on the ground, it feels really, really important. The church that I am part of now is not the same as the church I was ordained into 16 years ago. We have improved dramatically in our safeguarding procedures. And I don't want the people in our churches to suddenly be afraid that there is no safety, that there is nobody who cares, that there is nobody who is trying to get it right. Just that very human acknowledgement that we are still sometimes getting it wrong and there is more work to do.
What Rachel says there is so important, because locally I have real confidence in my diocese that if there was a safeguarding issue, I know who I need to ring, and I know the people know who they need to ring. It's the senior stuff, isn't it? It's the big stuff. It's the people at the very top that are falling across historical stuff that's being drip fed out by the media and Channel 4. And it's almost like the Church of England don't know what's coming next. Other people know what's coming before we do. And that's a precarious place to build a safeguarding policy upon.
I wanted to come on that point, actually, to the Philip North, the Bishop of Blackburn, if I can. Do you feel frustrated, Philip, that the church hasn't really been able to get that side of the story across? I mean, you've got a better story to tell on safeguarding, these kind of fairly radical reforms on independence, you know, solid work over the last 10 years in building out the local network. And yet the kind of general assumption, I think, is the church is in disarray.
We've got INEC going around doing very, very thorough independent audits of different dioceses in the Church of England, and they're reporting a good safeguarding culture in most of those. We've got tremendous heroic work going on the ground with parish safeguarding officers and clergy really taking safeguarding seriously and going to tremendous lengths. And I'm just devastated, really, that this mess that we're seeing unfolding since the publication of the Making Report undermines that good work. And I can totally get why trust in bishops is at such a low ebb. It really is at a low ebb, and there's reasons for that. We've seen poor judgment. We've seen quite possibly poor behaviour. We felt trapped, I think, quite often by systems and structures and processes that appear often to be controlling us. And I think, you know, when the bishops were meeting last week, we're very, very deeply shaken by this.
Is there a sense in which potentially the journalists are actually doing you a favour here in having a kind of winnowing phase, clearing the decks, bringing all the bad apples to the surface, opening the skeletons in the closet, and maybe if the church can get through this, you know, maybe push a few more people who need to be pushed out of the church in the process, actually it's in a better place to go forward?
It's an irony, isn't it? The Sunday was in the Book on Prayer, the Feast of Purification of the Lord. It does feel like the church is being purified, and it does feel like God is working through this kind of media frenzy that's happening at the moment. The question is, what do we do about it? I think we need, what do we do to recover trust at a national level? We need action. And for me, what's going to Synod next week is just the start, because we need to look much more deeply at clergy terms and conditions and at the HR processes that should stop these slow, heavy legal processes that so much distress people. But also, I think bishops need to look at how we lead and how we can lead differently. Jesus places the child at the very center of the community as the role model of leadership. We need to reflect again on what that means and think and relearn the art of humility.
Do you think these scandals will prevent the church from kind of exercising its role of kind of moral authority? Have they kind of so besmirched its reputation that you can no longer speak into kind of questions of character and integrity to the nation as the established church has traditionally seen its role? I
think it's very interesting that, Father Alex is on this call, who's doing extraordinary work in very deprived communities in Burnley and is pushing government to change the classification of a dangerous drug, and is being listened to. I think the local church is still credible and the local church is still vibrant. I think, speaking as a bishop, we've got some work to do to recover trust. And certainly I feel less confident in speaking to the public square than I did last year.
Well, I wanted to come to Alex actually just on that point. Do you feel like people have changed how they see you when they see you in your dog collar now? Do you feel like the scandals of those other higher ups has tarnished your ability in the community to be that kind of position of integrity, character, moral authority?
I don't mean to sound arrogant, but no, I don't think it has. I think I've built with my colleagues over a number of years relationships where people do trust us, and they trust us because they can't trust other people. They've been failed by social services or the NHS or the government or the police force, and they've turned to us. And that's what the church is there for, I think, to kind of be that pastoral support. I think Bishop Philip made a really important point about HR protocols and policies. I mean, in what other industry would somebody have 18 months of study leave? It just doesn't, to other people, it just looks ridiculous. If you're on long-term sick, that's something something completely different. But again, that trust is eroded because we're not giving clarity about the actual situation. So it hasn't affected the trust of. I don't think it has. Other people would be probably better placed to ask, but I think for people who are in difficult positions, it's a difficult position for them as well. How do we regain that trust? And you just go about your work. And I'm pleased to say, people on the ground in the urban context of Burnley don't read the Times, the Church Times, Channel 4. They read the Sun and the Daily Mail, and they're currently not really interested in reporting that, because maybe they think we've become completely irrelevant, and that is a huge sadness.
Can I ask you, Rachel, you're a member of the Synod. Which way will you be voting next week on independence? Have you made your mind up there?
It's interesting. I think we've come a long way between the last Synod discussion about independence, when I will admit to having been unconvinced, because I was deeply concerned about losing the expert knowledge of the church on the ground that our safeguarding officers in the diocese had. We now have options on the table, as Miranda was saying earlier, that integrate independence and keeping that knowledge on the ground. And I'm leaning in that direction, Tim, but I never really talked to anybody about which way I'm voting. So,
if I can just come in, I think a strong independent scrutiny body is an absolute given. I think there are questions arising about option 4, particularly because many safeguarding professionals have big issues with it, which we must listen to. And there is some concern that diocesan boards of finance will be unable to carry out their responsibilities to the Charity Commission under that option 4. So I'm looking forward to really good and open debate about that. Both will strengthen safeguarding significantly, I think, but we mustn't lose track of these other issues around HR and around clergy terms and conditions, which would have made such a transformative difference, I think, to what's happened in the last few months.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bishop, Rachel, Alex, and Tim. Just to say to everyone, there will be opportunity for questions. If you're a journalist on the call and want to ask anything, do indicate that in the chat box. So we're on to the final section of the discussion now, which is the impact of the events in Liverpool on the nation. There's a standing of the Church of England in the nation. And Catherine Pepinster, journalist of reputation and experience with us at the Religion Media Centre and many other outlets. Catherine, you're leading the questioning on this, so over to you.
Thank you, Ruth. Could I start with Bishop Philip North? Bishop, we've heard from other speakers, colleagues of yours in the Church of England, that they are effectively trying to keep going, business as usual, serving in their parishes. That may well work very well for those who are members of those parishes. But as we know, the majority of people in this country do not attend Church of England services, or indeed other church services on Sundays, that we are not that godly a nation anymore. How do you think what has happened in Liverpool, following on so fast after what's happened with Archbishop Justin Welby and also question marks over Stephen Cottrell, how do you think this is impacting on the Church of England's standing in the nation?
I do still think there's a disparity going on. So I was very intrigued at Christmas attendances in Blackburn Diocese and around the country, and the significant increase in the numbers of people coming to church services on Sunday. We continue to run, significant numbers of social projects, youth ministry, etc. So our service to the community is carrying on. One could argue expanding. I can't deny there's huge reputational damage done to the church at a national level, to the standing of bishops and to the perception of the church in the Church of England. And we feel still to be very much on the back foot, very much on the defensive. I outlined two areas in which I think we need to take action. I think we do now need to get onto the front foot, demonstrate that we can put in place the necessary safeguarding reforms and start to change the language.
That I can understand why you're saying that, but still, for those who are just vaguely aware of the Church of England and maybe think about it if they're thinking of getting married, or maybe they need to have a funeral somewhere, are they going to be drawn back to the Church of England? At the moment, it must seem to them that some of your moral authority has gone out the window.
I think for most people, their knowledge of the Church of England is their parish church and their church school and the services and the presence of a parish priest. And that seems simply to be continuing as it is. But as I say, I do think at a national level, we need to think, how do we restore reputation? How do we do what we want to do? For me, the great damage is the evangelistic damage. Our job is to capture imaginations with the person of Jesus Christ. It's difficult to do that when we're getting day after day at a national level of bad coverage.
Being the national church, being the established church, does not depend on public consensus. It didn't grow out of public consensus. But perhaps there might be a connection between distrust and disestablishment. Could I bring in Theo Hobson to talk about this? Theo, you wrote a book some years ago, Against Establishment, an Anglican Polemic. Do you feel that what has been happening in the Church of England in recent months is affecting its standing, and therefore its established status might be under threat in any way?
No, I don't think it really does increase a case for disestablishment, as some have said. In fact, I think it's rather the opposite, because the whole safeguarding issue raises questions about the interplay of religious and secular authority, really. The whole idea of independent safeguarding body is really the church submitting itself to a non-church authority to a large extent. And I don't think the Catholic Church, for example, would do that. So it's something about the established church where we expect that level of public scrutiny to be involved. And we have to make a decision whether we really want that. And of course, the bishops said they wanted that a few years ago and then got cold feet about the implications of having independent scrutiny of safeguarding. And because of the recent events, it now looks inevitable that that will come about. And I think we need to understand that that's quite a big deal. And in a sense, it means a deepening of establishment, because it means that a secular body has statutory powers to comment on whether a bishop, for example, is using his authority well, or whether his position is untenable. And it's better to have that coming from a body than coming from Kathy Newman on Channel 4 News. And that's what we've got at the moment in recent times. And I'd rather have a more organised body than trial by media.
Some years ago, John Habgood, then Archbishop of York, was questioning the role of the monarch as supreme governor of the Church of England and asked whether it meant the monarch has to be as morally sober as an archbishop. That suggests that archbishops have to be morally sober for the established church. Do you think that is the case?
Well, of course, we expect higher standards from clergy than we do from secular leaders, and inevitably and rightly so. You could have a prime minister who's married a few times and known to have some sketchy personal life, but you wouldn't expect that of a bishop. And quite rightly, if that comes out, that would make his position untenable. So we do have higher standards, but that's a difficult issue when it comes to public scrutiny, because we're used to public scrutiny of public institutions being the sort of normal standard of what the law allows. And so there is a heightened intensity to safeguarding within the church than in any other body, partly because there's more vulnerable people around, because there's a certain sort of authority that a priest or a bishop has. So there's all these questions that make it different from any other walk of life.
You believe that these recent troubles are not going to affect the establishment, but nevertheless you remain keen on disestablishment, but for other reasons?
No, actually, I've changed my position on disestablishment.
Change your mind?
Yeah, I changed my mind on that. I'm now more on the fence, or even pro-establishment in a certain way. So I'm no longer an advocate of that.
What does a certain way mean?
Well, I've come to appreciate that the church has positive links with liberal politics and the liberal state, and it's a special sort of church where it's tied in with a certain idea of political and social liberalism, if you like, that it's signed up to just through its historical development. And that's pretty unique. No other church really has that. Other churches have more idea of their autonomy from the liberal state, for example, whereas we in the Church of England, we believe in that special connection, that it's right and proper that we have a semi-secular leadership, because we have a special idea of theopolitics, of what church and state should be, that is tied in with liberal values.
Bringing Bishop North back in, just talking about establishment, Bishop, I imagine that you would be in favour of establishment, but nevertheless, is it in any way made more difficult by recent circumstances? I mean, for example, it would be a pretty tricky situation, wouldn't it, if there needed to be another coronation where the monarch would be crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury after what's been going on in recent months?
It will be there'll be a new Archbishop of Canterbury because one has accepted responsibilities and resigned. I can see huge attractions in disestablishment, actually, contrary to what you presume, and the freedoms it would give the church. It feels bizarre that our bishops are appointed by a prime minister, for example. I think what it does, though, is it gives us responsibility. The interesting thing about establishment for me is the cure of souls. So the responsibility that an Anglican priest has for every single person in his parish. And I suspect if we talk to Rachel and Alex, a great deal of their ministry in their parishes is around exercising that cure of souls, and his ministry beyond a gathered congregation, a responsibility for a community. That's where it interests me, where it's about service and responsibility. We need, though, to be able to do that as safely as possible, which is why Synod next week matters so much.
You also mentioned earlier about not feeling so confident speaking into the public square at the moment, and that is presumably part of the role of clergy at local level and bishops both at diocesan and national level as well. So if that's more difficult now, that is an issue for you, isn't it?
I think that is an issue, particularly for bishops. As I've said, I think parish clergy are continuing to do that. I think at the moment, our reputation as a house of bishops is going through a problem, and we need to deal with that problem. And I certainly feel less confident in speaking out on some issues around justice and poverty and so on than I would have done. I'm very much praying that we can address that problem and recover our voice in the public square. Because one of the great things about the Church of England is we're present locally in every single community, even some which are extremely deprived and extremely complex. We know what's going on the ground and can magnify what's going on the ground to those in positions of power and responsibility. There's not many other organisations that can do that. So we must address this crisis quickly. We must move on so we can carry out our responsibilities, which is particularly around being a voice for justice and a voice for the poor.
And you talk about addressing it quickly. If you don't address it quickly, what do you think the consequences of that will be?
We need an intelligent, thoughtful debate next week at Synod, which comes to a clear conclusion that we can unite around safeguarding reform. And there's one or two other issues which I'm certainly pushing around clergy terms and conditions that we also need to address. I think I hope and pray that when people see that we're listening, taking action, modelling a different kind of leadership, we'll be able to recover our voices.
Thank you. I'm now going to pass back to Ruth Peacock.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. All of our guests are still on the call, and I know we have journalists on the call as well, so it is your chance to put questions. But I'm going to go to Tim Wyatt first for supplementary, Tim.
Well, there's one thing that's been bubbling away in the back of my mind as we have this conversation is that it feels like it's a little bit too convenient that next week's Synod is about to discuss these long-awaited independence reforms. It'd come at a very good time, in some sense, for the church, which is reeling from scandal. And I wonder, I'd like to ask some of the people who maybe are on the Synod who'll be voting on this, is there a risk that we see this independence as a bit of a silver bullet, when in fact there's every chance that if we'd had an independent model in place, exactly the same outcome in Liverpool would have taken place. It would be in the same safeguarding professionals at the national team, just working for a different employer, who would have investigated, would have concluded the evidence wasn't strong enough, and probably would have said, we carry on with some additional training for John Perumbalah, and the same outcome occurs. I mean, maybe I could ask Miranda that if she's still there. Is there a chance that we are putting a little bit too much store by this independence model, necessary as it may be, when actually some of the problems the church are grappling with go deeper than that?
I think it's a really good point. It's really important that people on the call understand, in terms of an in-depth briefing, that there is not going to be a silver bullet next week. The papers, I don't expect everyone to read kind of 100-page papers, but the papers on that are coming on safeguarding are really clear that one of the things that the very in-depth review that's gone on over this last year has brought up, even before this latest issue, is that the safeguarding, which is about managing risk, and very specifically about managing risk for vulnerable people. It's not about dealing with issues of misconduct, general HR things, and so on. So although it might have helped a bit, it wouldn't necessarily have done this. And there's a whole nother piece of work which that review has really pulled out in a much clearer way. Before they were people say safeguarding and they mean all sorts of things. That review in that paper has really pulled out and highlighted that there's a really substantial piece of work that needs doing, as Philip North said, on clergy terms and conditions, clergy HR processes, clergy and bishop HR processes, which really at the moment we don't have in a very effective way. There is another piece of legislation that's also on the agenda for Synod next week, the clergy conduct measure, which is a replacement for the clergy discipline measure. This is all quite technical stuff. It makes some improvements which would have helped with some of this. So, for example, under the clergy conduct measure, if and when that comes into effect, there is no longer a statute of limitation for allegations of serious misconduct. So the question about things being out of time would no longer be an issue. But that in itself is not going to deal with all of these. And we know there is more work that needs doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a question from Clive Billiness. I hope I pronounced your surname properly. In the chat box, Clive, you are a member of the General Synod. You're not a journalist, but go ahead with your question.
It was really to ask that during the current crisis with the Bishop of Liverpool, the words retirement and resignation have been used interchangeably. And could someone clarify what has actually happened here? Because if you retire, you leave with your pension and just go away. If you resign, the assumption is you have to go and get another job somewhere. And I just think it's a shame the two words are being used interchangeably rather than trying to sort of be clear what's happened here.
The words the bishop used himself was retirement. And so the Diocese of Liverpool has taken his words and used his words in any of our statements about what he has done. Others have used the word resignation. And I think the distinction that Clive makes is an important one, but that is probably for either the Church Commissioners or the Archbishop of York's office to establish what the position is. But we were very assiduous. Our bishop said he has retired, and therefore we said he has retired, because throughout all of this, we've not asked him to resign or retire. We asked him to step aside so that an investigation could happen.
One neat way around it was a lot of journalists put quit in the headline, that the bishop had quit, which gets around the issue. Andrew Brown, you have a question?
My question is, do people think that there's been a general presumption of guilt in the media coverage, that the assumption is that anybody who is accused of anything is guilty?
The media that I've seen, Andrew, and I'm wary about that because I'm conscious that we all exist perhaps in our own media bubbles. But the media that I've seen, yes, I think there has been a presumption of guilt. There's also been a quite disturbing polarisation. The words bandwagon and pitchfork and torch have been used a lot, as people have assumed, based on what they do know and based on what they don't know, things that have happened in this particular situation. I think that's been kind of dangerous and disruptive, and it doesn't help us to help anyone who has been hurt in a situation like this. And a little bit more care, I think, and nuance and compassion would be really helpful.
I hope Bishop John's retirement/resignation makes everybody feel as uncomfortable as I do about that process, because this is a gentleman who's potentially retired at 58, who's claimed that he's done nothing wrong. And you compare that with the other extremes of things, and I don't want to go into them in detail, but, there was the issue in our own diocese in Blackburn Cathedral and how difficult it was to remove somebody from employment. It shows you the challenges and the difficulties that are set out for our HR policies and procedures. And I'm a parish vicar, so I don't understand employment law in the Church of England, but I understand it from a previous world. And there's all sorts of issues in here around constructive dismissal, whether around disciplinaries, all those kind of things. Alarms are going off in my head, and I hope they're going off in the Church of England's head as well.
That was very much alluded to or said in this statement that Mick Ord introduced earlier. Channel 4 had a statement from one of the complainants, and then there was this private comment which has been made public. And I know what your position is on that you feel it shouldn't have been made public, but that was in response to the information on Channel 4. Can I go to Madeleine Davis now from the Church Times?
My question is around whether we need to define more clearly what safeguarding is and isn't, and what it can and can't do. So a statement from the senior leaders in Liverpool said, "We understand that some of the allegations against the Bishop of Liverpool have been investigated and found unsubstantiated by the NST. But in fact, the NST only assesses risk. It doesn't make decisions about culpability or guilt. And so that in itself is confusing to people, I think, in terms of what we do and don't know about the allegations against the Bishop of Liverpool. So I'm just quite concerned that we have clarity about what safeguarding is and isn't."
You're absolutely right, Madeleine. And it is one of the things that on the General Wilkinson response group, we were really, really clear needed to be addressed and couldn't be addressed by the Future of Church Safeguarding paper, because that is specifically about safeguarding, which, as you say, safeguarding is about the management of risk. The Church of England safeguarding teams are about trying to keep people safe in parishes. So they deal with allegations, they help support survivors, they help train parish safeguarding officers, they put in place risk management programs where, say, an ex-offender wishes to attend a parish church, they find an appropriate church and put in place a support there, they do safeguarding. They are not a police force or an investigatory force. They're not private detectives. They're not there. And they're really clear on this because they're professionals with their own code of conduct. They're not there to establish guilt or innocence. And in the Church of England's current structures, the only systems we have for dealing with that are the clergy discipline measure, which requires a complainant to put in a complaint, and then there is an assessment process. It is quite a grueling process, and it's entirely understandable why not necessarily everybody feels that is necessarily an appropriate thing to do. And itself puts bishops and those, archdeacons and so on, those who are charged with doing the investigation for those in quite an awkward position because, I'm not a police force, I'm not a private detective. We can't make those sort of decisions. So where something is a very serious allegation of criminal behaviour, that's straightforward. It's passed on to the police and they do whatever investigation is required. But of course, what the general public expect is for the church to be making these judgments in a way that at the moment we certainly don't have procedures for. And in many ways, it's not appropriate for us to do them. And that is something that we know needs improving.
Thank you very much, Amanda. We're drawing to a close, but I would like to just finish by asking our three journalists who asked the questions. So Mick, Catherine and Tim, if you would just give us very briefly your takeaway, your assessment from everything you've heard and the answers that have been given today. Mick, can I start with you, then go on to Tim, then Catherine?
Yeah, just a quick one, really. I mean, whatever the Synod decides to come up with next week in terms of choosing new safeguarding or disciplinary processes, I just hope the internal culture from the bottom upwards appreciates them and goes with them, because it was very depressing speaking to clergy people, asking them to come on the panel today, and they wouldn't do it because they didn't trust the hierarchy. And that just sounds like a fairly toxic culture. I do crisis comms with another hat on, and the church is obviously going through a crisis at the moment, but it'll only get better if things like that can be sorted out, both in terms of systems, but also the trust between people on the ground and higher up management, if you like.
Well, I'm really pleased that we had that conversation at the end about some of the complexities of this, because I think there is a lot of, as I alluded to some earlier, a lot of kind of slightly shallow thinking that we can just wash our hands of this as a church, hand it over to an independent body, don't ever think about safeguarding and open that too difficult box. When actually, as Miranda and Madeline have made clear, there is the further you go into this kind of chasm opens up and there's more and more tangles of terms of service. We haven't even got on to Philip North's suggestions that we should convert clergy to be employees, not office holders, and overturn centuries of employment structures. I think it's really important that we try and get a handle on the complexity and not get sucked into kind of easy he said, she said, goodies and baddies, draw conclusions. I had sympathy for John Perumbalah's claim that we had trial by media, even as a member of the media, but I don't know if the church is really ready to do it a better way yet.
Yes, I think my takeaway is I think there are two areas worthy of research emerging from what I've heard today. One is we're constantly told, and my personal experience is that this is true, that at the parish level there are terrific individuals doing all kinds of marvellous things, and that the local parish makes a really positive, significant difference to other people's lives. And then people who emerge out of those parishes, people who've been vicars and rectors and then become part of the hierarchy, something happens. The traditions, the structures, whatever of that world changes things. So what happens? I'd like to see some research done into that. And the other is, if the Church of England goes down the route of independent scrutiny of its safeguarding, it's going to be running a very different method to that of the Roman Catholic Church, which is resisting independent scrutiny and wants to retain safeguarding in the hands of its bishops. So you've therefore got two different systems, and it would be worth suddenly comparing and contrasting them if that indeed happens.
Thank you. I think my takeaway is the central role of the media in all of this, which you may say is to tell the truth about what's going on, what hasn't been told elsewhere, perhaps. Leave that in abeyance. We're all going to be at the Synod next week. We look forward to seeing you there, and we'll pick the conversation up afterwards when we find out what happened. Thank you all very much for joining us today.